Shaping Britain's conversation. The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, it's the Brexit bill again, because today, another press conference, Michel Barnier, David Davis being very smiley, very chirpy, Monsieur Barnier, in this current serious mood that we've discussed over the course of the last week, continuing to make demands, continuing to insist that there is a bill to pay. Now, this row has been going on properly now, right back ever since we first voted to leave. And I remember when Barnier was saying, unless you pay us this vast sum of money, then, of course, we can't even discuss trade. And I said they were behaving like the mafia, as if they were holding us to ransom. And this is how Barnier responded to that.
People have used words like ransom, Mr. Farage, in the Parliament. It's not a ransom. It's not an exit bill. It's not a punishment. It's not a revenge. At no time has it been those things. It is simply settling accounts. The way you do it, and it's not easy, and it might be expensive. But any separation involves settling accounts. No more, no less. I want to discuss with the UK line by line, but they have to start by recognising that they've entered into commitments with us. And that's why I'm saying we have to settle the accounts of the past before we start talking about the future.
Well, that was what he said back then. To bring you up to speed, here is Michel Barnier today on the exit bill.
The United Kingdom recognised the existence of obligations vis-à-vis the Union beyond the date of withdrawal and the need to settle those obligations.
And the United Kingdom's chief negotiator, David Davis, responded with this.
Well, the Prime Minister has been very plain about this from the beginning, from her Lancaster speech onwards. She said we will meet our international obligations and expect to be respected for our international rights. She said that Parliament will make decisions after we leave, and after we leave we'll come to the end of the UK paying enormous sums to the European Union. All of those are still true.
Well, there's a note there, I think, perhaps of some concession from David Davis, hinting that whilst we won't go on paying vast sums of money, there's a Brexit bill of some kind. This is how UKIP MEP Stuart Agnew responded today, standing on the steps of the European Commission.
I can give him clarification. We owe them nothing. We don't even owe them this, a penny. We owe them nothing. There's nothing in the Lisbon Treaty about a financial settlement at all. This has been pulled out of thin air, and now they're trying to run with it as though it's an established fact. We don't owe them anything. We actually own a share of that place over there. We have given them £185 billion in net contributions over the last 40 years. We'd quite like to have that back. They've got assets around and about of about £133 billion. We own some of them. It's a two-way course on this. The European Union is losing a massive partner when we go. They should be down on their knees to us, not telling us that we have got to do this, that and the other. They have got to be realistic. We are leaving the European Union. They've got to deal with that. And you're right, there will be less money about, and they're going to have to pull in their drawstrings. We have been financing this place for far too long.
So there we are. All shades of the argument represented there. On the one hand, Stuart Agnew of UKIP saying, not a penny, we're done. We've given you all our dough, enough's enough. Monsieur Barnier saying it could be a lot of money and very expensive. And David Davis, I think, realistically treading a diplomatic middle course at this stage, given, as he sees it, that everything is on the table. My question to you is, should the United Kingdom pay a Brexit bill at all? And I'll tell you, as the show goes on, what I think. I don't suppose it'll surprise you. But I'll also tell you, during the course of this hour, what wholly unreasonable people we are dealing with, and why perhaps a moment may come at some point in this Article 50 negotiation where we may need to simply stand up and walk out of the room and wait for them to come after us. After all, there's an awful lot of German motor cars driving on the streets outside this studio right now here in London. Nigel in Chadwell Heath is my first caller this evening. Nigel, should we pay a Brexit bill at all?
Well, the answer to that, in my view, is simple. We must pay what we owe. Now, the question to determine is, what do we owe? that must be a matter of legal obligation. I simply don't know. I've no doubt you know.
Okay,
more.
well...
Now, can I just finish? Hang on.
Yeah.
Can I make my point? Now, as far as what we actually owe is concerned, if there is a disagreement between us and the Europeans, there must be some way of determining it independently. Now, let me just go on to make this point. Emotive language on either side doesn't help. It's a matter of pure economics. You may have a distaste for some of these leaders. I may share it, but it's not relevant. The question that really arises is what is in the nation's best interests. My own view on it is very simple. If we cannot come to an agreement with these people, and it may well be that we can't, that their demands are simply too high, then, as you said in your introduction, we need to walk away. We simply have to say, well, I'm terribly sorry, we wish you well for the future, but our future lies outside this union. The European Union is absolutely beset with the most difficult and intractable problems. They're in debt to their eyeballs. They've got hundreds of thousands of immigrants arriving. They do not know what to do or how to cope. So I think we just, if we can't come to an agreement, and let me just add this, we do not need to use money as a separate issue from the rest of the matters. If we were to incur any obligations over and above those which we are legally obliged, we want something in return. If they don't like it, then, I mean, I'm just saying don't use emotive language. I was about to do so myself. If they don't like it, we say cheerio.
Well, the thing is, Nigel, everybody gets very, very emotional when they talk about this subject, of course. So, what about our obligations? You've asked that question. So, from the moment we voted to leave until, let's assume we do leave at the end of March 2019, we will have paid in net over the course of that period of time approaching 30 billion sterling. And we will have done that because we're still a member of the club. Now, the European Union, Nigel, operates on a series of spending rounds. They last for 7 years. It's called the multi-annual framework. I mean, let's not get too bogged down in that. This current one ends in 2020. So you could say that morally we have signed up to a series of spending agreements that take us through a little bit past the date we're going to leave. But beyond that, do we have any legal obligation? Well, Nigel, in Article 50, it makes it clear that the rights and obligations deriving from the treaties would therefore extinguish upon our leaving. All right? So it's perfectly clear. The Lisbon Treaty makes it very clear there are no future obligations. Now, I can think of one area in which there might be an exception to this, and that would be the area of pensions. And we'll talk about that again, not right now, but later on during the course of this hour. But, as you say, it could be that the British government position is they're prepared to pay a bit more than that if in return they get a free trade deal. But are we legally obligated, beyond the middle of 2020 to pay anything to the EU? Nigel, I promise you the answer is no.
Well, then fine, let's not do so, unless, as I say, we get something in return which is worth paying for. I mean, I have to say they're a thoroughly disagreeable bunch, and as far as I'm concerned, the quicker we're out, the better. But the fact remains, we have to do what we are obliged to, no more, unless there's a quid pro quo.
Absolutely, and I think, Nigel, that is what is in David Davis's mind. And I suppose if he was to produce, here's a free trade deal, it's going to cost us X, some people would say it was a price worth paying. There are many others, like Mr Agnew, the MEP who you heard earlier, who makes the point that actually we've paid net 185 billion into this club since we joined. And actually, we have a stake in the European Investment Bank. We have, we actually are an asset holder, and they should be paying us. That's the way the argument will go. Phil in Nottingham. Good evening, Phil. Should we pay a Brexit bill?
Well, no, Nigel, I don't think we should. And can I just say, it's a great honour to speak to you. I have followed you for many, many years. And when I voted Brexit, I didn't need a Brexit campaign. I wanted out for the last 35 years.
Oh, really?
Yes, I had a gut instinct many, many years ago that this was not right, and there was more to it, far more to it, deep, deep things that I don't know. I often wondered what your opinion of it was, whether the whole thing about the pan-European movement was. But with regards to the Brexit thing, for somebody who's been divorced, I know full well what it's like when lawyers start thrashing things out about things that we've all contributed to. So, I lost half my house. I lost half of pretty much everything, but she contributed to this. There was tussles over the pension. I don't see why we should be given a great big bill when we've contributed to so many things. There's probably buildings and things and structures in Europe.
Yep.
We can say, right, well, half of that, thank you very much. And so it just fails to offset what we've contributed to into the fabric and the structure of Europe against this bill. They don't like us. They haven't never liked us. They've always envied our...
Phil, it's a rotten telephone line, but I get the point. Phil says that the line that I've taken on all of this all the way through is we shouldn't be paying a Brexit bill. Actually, I'm far too soft on this. As Phil from Nottingham says, they should be paying us. Chris on Twitter says, the UK udder has run dry. Keep an eye on a lot of them, sir. I'm starting to worry that Brexit will not happen. If that happens, I will never vote again, says Gary. I'd pay them 88p to take a hike and stop giving the UK this headache. There's all sorts of suggestions coming in, some of which I can't read. Peter in Blackheath, should we be paying a big Brexit bill?
Definitely no.
Definitely no, right?
On the basis that it's a membership and it's not a divorce. We are supposed to pay every year for what we're supposed to pay. I'm up for that. But it says on the accession treaty, it's only current members who pay. Once the 2 years are up, we'll be out. We will not be a current member. There's no liability onto us whatsoever.
No, Peter, and it says here in Article 50, for a withdrawing member state, the rights and obligations deriving from the treaties would therefore extinguish. Peter, I am with you on this. Do you know what? We've paid them enough, Peter. We really have. I thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's 7:15. Monsieur Barnier from Brussels insists that we agree to the Brexit bill before we can start to talk constructively about trade or anything else. My view is he's being pretty unreasonable about this, and they're expecting us to pay a sum that is way beyond our commitments and our obligations. Harold on Facebook says, if during our membership we have agreed to financially support decisions, we must honour our commitments. Harold, I agree with you, and I accept that there will be, after Brexit, about a year of further expenditure that we had collectively agreed to. That is a commitment that we've made. Fine, we must honour it. There is the issue of pensions. About 20,000 people have either been MEPs, well, a few hundred of MEPs, but nearly 20,000 people have worked for the European Commission and other European institutions during those years. They are due pensions. But rather than that being a financial commitment that we pay to Brussels, why doesn't the British government simply take those pensioners off the hands of the European Commission and look after it here in this country? Tom says simply no. I'm sick of paying people who work for us when they do nothing for us. Nicola says it's not about free trade, it's about honouring commitments. Yep, Nicola, agree with all of that. Deb says if any payment is required and it isn't for free trade, then the EU should pay us, as they sell more to us than we sell to them. So some pretty strong opinions on this. I said earlier that I felt that Monsieur Barnier had been behaving badly. I accused him of behaving like a mafia boss back a few months ago. They are being unreasonable, and they are completely unreasonable people. And Brexit has literally unhinged them. So as David Davis is negotiating on behalf of all of us, I this week received in the post a recorded delivery letter with a big European Parliament stamp on it. So I signed the piece of paper and I opened it up, and they tell me that one of my members of staff, who's been working for me for years, who works jolly hard and helps represent me as an MEP in the southeast of England, for which I'm one of the representatives, has also had a post in UKIP at the same time. Would be quite surprising, wouldn't it, if people that work for me weren't also involved in UKIP, just as it's the same in the Tory party or the Labour Party or the Lib Dems or the Greens. And this guy did have a honorary job in UKIP, but completely unpaid, which he did in his spare time. Now, they're not happy with that. And so without any meeting, without any request to me to provide evidence, without any formal procedure of any kind at all. The letter tells me they're going to take £80,000 from me. That's right. They're going to take £80,000 from me without even meeting me, talking to me, and it's now my job to prove my innocence. And so what we're actually dealing with here, these people, these unelected people, are behaving, frankly, like people back in Stalin's day did. What I'm guilty of is not in any way misusing public money. What I'm guilty of is blasphemy. I have spoken out against their beloved union. I've helped Brexit to happen, and therefore I must be punished. Well, whatever happens to me in this case, and of course I'm going to fight it, but it's not easy to fight against people who respect no rules and, frankly, no normal course of law. But David Davis is dealing with these very same people, and I think he's got to stand firm. I don't believe there is a Brexit bill. I believe we should meet our legal obligations and do so in the right spirit, but nothing more than that. Beryl in Dagenham, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. So what should we do? You know, you're David Davis. What would you do?
Any money that's due, if it's due or whether it's due or not, should be paid.
Yes.
But I think it should be paid by you.
But by me?
Strictly. Yeah, of course by you.
Oh,
you
right.
have used this as your baby. For 17 years, you keep bragging about, I've been fighting for 17 years, but you keep taking the wages.
Well, what was I to do, Beryl?
And all the other MEPs and all the other British MEPs that voted for Brexit, you should all get together and pay. You're an hypocrite. You told people a load of lies.
Oh, now, hang on. Now, Beryl, let's just deal with this one at a time, shall we? Because this is obviously going to be a lot of fun. So, tell me, why am I a hypocrite? Explain.
Get back out of this country, because this is what you told them, and they took it literally. And any money to be paid should all... Hang on.
No, you can't run away.
Why are you taking the wages?
Ah, right. So is
you should lead by example.
Is that hypocrisy?
Listen, if I hate my employer and I'm telling my fellow workers not to work for this employer and I'm getting paid by the employer, that makes me an hypocrite.
Right.
Does it not?
So would you say the same thing? Would you say the same thing to the Scottish National Party? Because they...
I don't care about the Scottish National Party. I live in England. I live in Dagenham. I don't know to hear nothing about
listen,
the
Beryl, just about 10 miles from where you live, there is a place called Westminster, and there are over 40 Scottish National MPs sitting there, and your taxes go towards their salary. So do you think they're hypocrites as well?
Salary, I don't know what you're getting paid for anyway. You're not even a politician. You're a failed politician. You should be...
No, we're struggling here, aren't we?
You shouldn't even be... No, I'm not struggling, my friend. You are struggling. You are not...
Tell me, are the SNP hypocrites?
You can't be mentioned anymore. UKIP are dead and buried. Listen, goodbye, my friend.
Oh, dear. See, well, there we are. Look, any of you can call. You can disagree. You can call me what you like, and I will give you the floor, the stage, to expose me to the nation and to the world. But there's not much point ringing up with vitriol and then hanging up. I'm very disappointed in Beryl from Dagenham, I really am. Let's try Sal from Caterham in Surrey. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Farage.
Good evening. So,
if nothing else, you invoke a lot of passion, Mr. Farage.
Well, that is what real democracy does, because real democracy is about making choices.
Correct.
And that must be, I mean, surely that is a good and healthy thing of itself.
It's extremely healthy. However, I need to ask you what...
Yeah?
The pound in my pocket today slumped even lower. Mm-hmm. Okay? I am poorer than I was this time last year as far as the euro is concerned and as far as the dollar is concerned. Can you tell me, Mr. Farage, when that my fortunes might improve?
Well, you're quite right, Sal, because actually the pound started falling very dramatically in 2010, and it fell steadily through 2010, 11, 12, 13. And then in 2014, the pound really started to fall sharply, and it's continued since the Brexit process. The pound is in decline, and actually, I wouldn't get too excited about it. It may make it a little bit more expensive for you to go on holiday to Europe, and I get that, and I understand that, but for a country as a whole, I'm not in the least bit concerned about the pound falling a bit. Far from it. I mean, surely when it comes to jobs and trade, the pound being a bit lower over the course of the last 7 or 8 years is not such a bad thing, is it?
Well, it is. It does. It impacts me directly because we have a business that is also done in euros. So, right.
So were you screaming about this well before Brexit?
Well, no. I mean, I was quite happy when it was at 1/3. Quite comfortable, but I mean, at the moment, the people that voted for you, Mr. Farage, are also very poorer now.
But Sol, I'm sorry. I think you're missing. I think you're missing the point that the pound has been falling steadily over the course of the last 7 years.
Mm. Okay, so let me ask you another question.
Okay.
You had a very partisan view on the monies that we put across into the EU, delivered by a UKIP member, 185 billion
net.
Yeah. So what have we had back from the EU during that time?
Okay, right. Now, one of the problems with the referendum is that there were one or two on the Leave side that talked in gross figures. This is what we put in gross. And you're right, Sal, because that complicates the argument, because we do get money back. Generally, if you're very rich and you own lots of land, then the EU is the best thing that ever happened to you. I mean, if you're a member of the royal family or you're a duke with a very large estate, then you've got a lot of money out of the European Union. There's other money that's come back too, in the form of regional grants and aid, and money's been given to part-subsidised bypasses around towns in the north of England, provided it's got match funding. So we can look at gross or look at net. The point that Mr Agnew made is even after we've had the rebate, and even after we've had money spent back in this country, incidentally, often in ways that we might not have chosen ourselves, but even after all of that, for the sake of simplicity, we've net put in £185 billion. And what have we got for it, Sol?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm a Remainer, always will be, and I think that, frankly, this is not a good thing for the country. And there was a lot of rhetoric by yourselves and others for their own gain, which has essentially set sail on a journey. For many years.
Well, so look, let's be honest. The other side of the debate have had pretty much their own way for the last 45 years. They've been arguing for 45 years that we're part of something that is about trade. They argued back in 75 it wouldn't threaten our sovereignty, and in the end it did. And, any one side of a debate can criticise the other, but you did raise a very valid point at the beginning that if I've helped to bring a bit of passion back into British politics and to make people think that voting matters, if I've helped with that process, then I am pleased to have done that. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30. It's that Brexit bill, and Monsieur Barnier is getting sterner by the day. In fact, he begins to me to look a little bit like Bully Boy Barnier. And they are absolutely insisting that we cough up a large sum of money, and one that is way beyond any legal obligations that we have under the treaties that we've signed and passed in our Parliament. And I'm asking you whether we should be paying that Brexit bill. I really don't think we should. I have a feeling that the British government may, but I hope that if they do it, it's done because they get something in return for it, and they might think a free trade deal is a price worth paying. I don't, because actually they sell us more than we sell them. Also in the news today, crime figures. And we've seen the biggest rise in serious crime in this country for a decade. And the numbers, well, they're not very pretty. Violence against the person, up by 18%. Sexual offences, up by 14%. Knife and gun crime, up by 20%. And Clive Bull will pick this up at 8 o'clock later and talk about, is there a link between this and falling police numbers? Or, I might suggest, one of the reasons numbers keep going up is because our population dramatically keeps going up. So perhaps these figures, horrid though they are a little bit less of a surprise than they might be. So back to the Brexit bill. And Paul in Stoke-on-Trent. Paul, you're David Davis. What are you going to do?
Yeah, Nigel, yes, of course we have to pay, because we don't live on a different planet. This is sometimes what I don't understand about with you guys when you're going on about this Brexit. We are part of Europe. There has been peace all my life because of countries working together. I've got friends across Europe, and it seems to me that people are just saying, no, nothing. We've entered into works all over Europe, all over our country that we need to go from. And if we just walk away, and we say we're not going to pay anything, then that destabilises everything. And just one other thing, Nigel, right, yeah? You and your UKIP people have worked in the Parliament, as an MPs for years, trying to bring this Brexit around, which successfully you did, okay? Then now UKIP should come out and say none of our MEPs are going to take a pension from the EU. None of them are. I'm not going to take a pension because this is what we've wanted. I'd love you to say that on air tonight. You will not take a pension.
Well, why should I?
Stop.
Why should I put my family through that?
Because if we go personally on Lou, because you've done it. You didn't want it. I mean, why couldn't I become an MEP and say, I've done it to support my family? Many of the MEPs under UKIP that I spoke to on Facebook, it seems to me it's a gravy train. And you guys are saying it's a gravy train and everyone's making money.
Well, I tell you what, Paul, if it was a gravy train, as you describe it, to be fair, to counterbalance that argument, the UKIP MEPs were in that situation, the turkeys that voted for Christmas, weren't they? I mean, if they were in it just for the money, they'd have backed Remain, and they'd have said, oh, you know what, I tell you what, Paul, we can reform this, we can make it better, just give us another 20 years. And we didn't do that, Paul, did we? But look, your point about friendship and everything else, I get. We, Paul, have an incredibly close relationship with the USA. You know, they're a country that we do a lot of business with. They're a country we share a language with. They're a country we fought alongside in wars that some would support, perhaps some wouldn't. But either way, we're incredibly close allies. No one, Paul, says we have to pay money to Washington every year, do they?
But hang on a second, Nigel, on that, right? They're 3,000 miles away.
So?
And if you're,
So?
So is a big thing, because I've got children and I've got to look for the future. So you're whipping stuff across the Atlantic, trading with a country that's 3,000 miles away, when you've got very local countries that we can trade with a much smaller carbon footprint. Now, I know you and your mate Trump are against, you don't think there's such a thing as global warming.
Well, I tell you what, Paul, I'll take the carbon footprint debate seriously, and I will take the EU wanting to deal with it seriously when they stop once a month emptying my office into a tin trunk in Brussels and driving it 400 kilometres down the road to Strasbourg for 4 days, after which it's unpacked and driven back again.
Good point, Nigel. But let me put this back to you. All right, you've been an MEP for all these years.
I know.
Why didn't you change it?
Because Paul, it's unchangeable, and Mrs. Thatcher at the height of her powers, Tony Blair at the height of his powers, went in as British Prime Ministers saying they were going to change and reform it, and they got absolutely nowhere. And we've been trying for over 40 years to change it. We've got nowhere. And that's why, Paul, in the end, I mean, had the referendum been let's leave, let's stay, or let's go for an option, because the EU have offered us a genuine reform option. Had that happened, Paul, we wouldn't have voted to leave. We voted to leave because fair-minded voters can see that we tried again and again and again to reform it and to change it, and actually it was going in the opposite direction. I want us, Paul, and by the way, you talked about friends and relations and business. I am not anti-European, Paul, at all. I think Europe is a wonderful place and a great continent, and I believe it'll be a happier, better, freer, and I hope more prosperous Europe when we're all independent nation states that work and trade together, not to be governed by the Commission. Paul, I thank you for your passion in that call. Chris in Richmond, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. I have to say, an incredible, as usual, bit of hypocrisy from you here. 4 years ago, I believe it was, you said you were going to have your expenses audited.
Yes.
Where's that audit? Why has it not happened, Nigel? You talk about European Union spending money in a way which we would like. I would potentially include spending money on expenses for one of the worst voting groups and attending groups in the European Union, which is the UKIP group.
Well, that's not actually true. I mean, you heard from Mr. Agnew earlier. I think he's got one of the highest attendance, voting and committee records of any British MEP ever since we first joined the European Union. So it is a mixed bag. It is a mixed bag. Party leaders tend to attend parliaments and vote less, whether they're in Strasbourg or indeed whether they're in London. And yes, I have been publishing my expenditure online.
No, auditing. The word was auditing, Nigel. I'm an auditor. I know the difference between publishing and auditing. There is a big difference. I've spent 25 years auditing. I know the difference. When are you going to submit an independent audit?
Chris, I said we'd publish them, and that was all we ever said.
You didn't. You said you would audit them, Nigel. I'm sorry, you're wrong. You know you said. You're lying on national radio. You said
No. I said I'd publish them, and I've been doing that. Anyway, Chris, your question.
Well, the other point is, regarding European Union funding, at the end of the day, the bigger question is, are all these people like yourself who say we should, leave the European Union, not pay an extra bill, are you going to be supporting the British government paying pound for pound every single penny that went into science research, university funding?
Well, do you know, Chris, I take this view. I mean, I'm often asked that question, and I was talking to sort of a small farming group the other day, and they say, well, is British agriculture going to continue to be supported? And Chris, the point I make is that at the moment we spend $6 billion a year supporting agriculture, 3 billion of which is in the European Union. So we can go on supporting British agriculture and from that be £3 billion a year better off. And I do agree, Chris, that actually in terms of funding and research and development of, new nuclear fusion strategies or whatever, the European Parliament has played a role as part of an international global community trying to advance science and mankind. And you know what? Of course I want us to play our full part in that post-Brexit, and there's no reason why we shouldn't, is there?
Well, no, there is, because my father worked in the National Physics Laboratory for pretty much 35 years, his entire career. Some of the projects that he got involved in, and people I know who work there now, would not happen and cannot happen if we leave the European Union. It's physically impossible to pull them together. Some of the places are not even applying for research funding going forward.
Oh, come on, Chris. Come on, Chris. Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, Albert Einstein, they all managed without the European Union, So look, there is nothing to stop us fully cooperating where we see fit, not just with Europe, but with anywhere in the world to advance science or medicine or whatever else it may be.
So Nigel, when it comes to clinical trials, I work for a pharmaceutical company, and I've done for a number of years. Are you happy with the fact the European Medicines Agency is leaving? All our best regulators are leaving this country, or will be soon. That's going to delay any new cancer treatment, or I guess what they call kind of orphan diseases, which are very difficult to find funding for. It's going to be very, very difficult. It's about time.
Excuse me, Chris. I'm somewhat sceptical. I'm somewhat sceptical that I think what we've seen in parts of the pharmaceutical industry is a very big business lobby through European regulation actually doing its best to close down small and medium-sized competitors, and in particular those offering alternative therapies. So we're perfectly capable, Chris, of regulating ourselves, the pharmaceutical industry. We don't need that to be done for us by Brussels. I certainly feel that. And Chris, we're not pulling back on the world. We haven't pulled up the drawbridge. We're not being isolationist. We're actually freeing ourselves to do more of these kind of projects on a world stage. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:45. It's that Brexit bill. It's that row. It's not going to go away in a hurry. And one or two of you have come on today and really tried to challenge me on a personal level, which I encourage. And The Nigel Farage Show needs. And you can call me all the names under the sun, provided you can justify it and stand it up. And Chris in Richmond said that, in fact, I was lying on national radio when I said I would have all my expenses audited. Well, I was asked about this on Radio 4's Today programme, back at the time of the last European elections. And I said there is no provision within the rules of this Parliament for any of this to be audited or to be published. But I said I would publish it. So I'm doing, Chris, far more than the rules even asked me to do. So, fine. Any of you that want to come on and call me a liar, want to come on and call me a hypocrite, it's 0345 6060 973. Yeah, provided we keep the language clean, you can come on and do it, but you have to back it up. Now, apparently, and I was waiting for this, I've not seen any messaging tonight about Jacob Rees-Mogg. I was getting worried. But here I've got one. The Mogg on Sky News today made the same point of no legal obligation, but a moral obligation to pay what we are committed to. Let's ask for a detailed schedule extracted from the audited accounts and cash flow forecasts of the European Union, says JP in Cornwall. And that's the point that I'm making, that even though under the treaty, once we've left at the end of March 2019, we don't actually owe them a penny piece. We did take part in this 7-year agreement for spending to the middle of 2020. So there is, actually, folks, I think there is morally a small Brexit bill to take us up to the end of that expenditure for which we said we'd be a part. After that, it's nothing. But, Monsieur Barnier, it is not 50 billion euros or 100 billion euros. I don't know. It might be 5 or 7 billion euros or something of that measure. We do have a moral duty, and it's important, I think, through these negotiations that we show ourselves to be open, honest and reasonable. The trouble is, the other side are not behaving that way. Felipe in Brussels, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How's it going?
Well, we're doing what we can. Now, should we be sending a
difficult one tonight, haven't you?
Well, that's all right. That's fine. That's actually, do you know what? That's democracy on the radio, and that's a very good thing too. So, should we be?
Handle it, and we all know that.
Should we be sending a thumping great big bill to your home city?
No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't. And I think that's the wrong question to ask at this stage of the negotiation. I think it says a lot about David Davies and how badly he's doing right now.
Okay, explain.
This is what we're talking about at this stage in the negotiations.
Well, isn't that agenda actually one that is being set by Monsieur Barnier, and isn't David Davis very keen to move on to start talking about trade?
Well, trade is something that you guys should be pushing a lot harder. I mean, this whole time we've heard this propaganda line out of this place saying that you're not allowed to negotiate with anybody else. Well, why the hell not? What's the Commission going to do if you close a deal with the United States or with Australia or with Canada or whoever it is?
Well, I suppose what they could do, Felipe,
especially after you leave,
what they could do is they could chuck us out, couldn't they? Which wouldn't be much point because we're leaving anyway. No, my point, Felipe, is that I don't actually think David Davis is the person that deserves criticism for where we are. It is the other side that are setting this agenda, and maybe that's partly the Prime Minister's fault for taking 9 months to trigger Article 50 and for us looking somewhat indecisive. But it is Monsieur Barnier that is making the unreasonable demands.
No, but I mean, I know I sound a bit chest-thumpy and aggressive when I say that, but seriously, what is actually stopping you guys from just closing deals with all these countries that want to close the deals?
Well, yeah, you know, you're right. And actually, Felipe, they broke the rules last week because they went behind the backs of the British government to start negotiating with Mr Corbyn, Nicola Sturgeon, Carwyn Jones. And if they can behave like that, we should be out there talking not just directly to other European governments, particularly those who sell us a lot of goods into this country and in whose interests a free trade deal is. We should be talking to America, Australia, Japan and the world. Felipe, I thank you. The stars on the BBC could afford the Brexit bill, says Honey me on Twitter. Nigel, I had a fishery and lost everything because of the EU. Roll on Brexit, we will be booming, says Terry. Walk away from the EU. No deal is better than a bad deal, Nigel. We want their cheese, cars and rotten sausages. Well, some of the sausages are OK, aren't they? Karen suggests that the pound was even lower before we had the referendum. Not quite. It did get to 135 against the dollar in February of last year. What was a lot lower before the referendum was, of course, the stock market, which has gone through the roof. And any of you that have got pension funds out there, you might be saying, thank goodness for Brexit. Look what it's done for my pension. Tom in Ottershaw, good evening. How big a Brexit bill, Tom, would you be prepared to pay?
Probably near to zero, actually. Good evening, Nigel. Pleasure to speak to you. I've got some practical experience, actually, just of today.
Yeah.
I run a small medical device company that seeks to develop technologies for handheld devices. And we're occasionally invited to apply for these EU scientific, grants and loans, etc. And the process is ludicrous. They're run as sort of competitions. You have to put in this enormous amount of paperwork, which is a kind of a game. And it's such a game that sort of companies have grown up around it, consultancy companies, who will guide you through this process for a percentage of the or a fee, contingent on you getting the grant. It's so hugely inefficient, it's ridiculous. In fact, I said to the consultancy company today, I feel like I've wandered into a parallel universe.
So it's not a very efficient way of doing business then, is it?
No, it isn't. And, all these EU things, science isn't going to come to a halt because of EU grants stopping or anything like that. All that's going to happen is huge savings going to be made in the administration of the grants.
I must admit, a lot of people, and I've heard this from farming as well, that farmers say, small farmers particularly, yeah, we do get money for owning land, but actually the amount of hours and time and bureaucracy we have to spend doing it, surely there's a better and simpler way of doing it when we're actually in charge. Tom, you're an next to zero man. I am too. But Tom, we should honour any moral obligation, shouldn't we?
Yes, I think we should, but until somebody sort of shows us the justification for the bill, and I don't think they should be making up a very, very large number and to try and get down to a smaller, larger number. No,
they shouldn't be holding us to ransom, Tom. That's the point that I agree with totally. I thank you. Nigel, before the vote you said, if the vote is close, say 48-52 remain, there should be another referendum or there'll be trouble in the streets. Do you still think that, Peter in Croydon? No, Peter, I said if it's 48-52 the other way, there'll be many unreconciled to it within the Conservative Party. Their split will last forever. But I doubted we'd get another chance to vote for at least 20 years. And I do actually think that Parliament, our MPs, most of them bitterly regretted that referendum because they don't, frankly, think we're good enough or clever enough to make our own minds up. And my last caller of the evening is Alex in Coleraine. Good evening.
Good evening. Nigel, could you clarify something? The payment that they say is due, how is that made up? How does that come about?
Well, you see, now that's the question, Alex, that I've twice asked Monsieur Barnier in open debate in the European Parliament. And answer, there comes none. To which I respond by saying they've plucked it out of the air. I simply, Alex, don't know. And I repeat the point. That we do have some spending commitments after we leave at the end of March 2019. For another year, we have commitments that we jointly signed up to. It's right and proper and decent that we should honour those. There is the ongoing issue of pensions, and I accept that, but I think the British government should simply take those pensioners off the EU onto its books. Beyond that, Alex, I don't think we should pay a penny, but I'd love them to tell me why we should, and they just don't do so.
Yeah, that's a good point. Why we should, and how do they come about? Well, the evidence. Give us the evidence. That's what we're asking for, really.
That's all we're asking for, and we're getting none of it. We're getting a very haughty Michel Barnier just saying, unless you agree to our terms, we're not going to have a reasonable trade deal with you. Alex, I thank you. Joanna says to me on Facebook, Nigel, do you think it's likely we will leave without a deal? Joanna, I hope not. the common sense thing, the logical thing. And Liam Fox, the Trade Secretary today, made the point that actually the easiest country in the world to do a trade deal with is the EU, because we've got parallel systems in many ways. This is about logic, economic logic, against political necessity. I feel Barnier is playing politics, is playing fast and loose, actually, with millions of people in Europe whose jobs depend on selling goods to our country. Should we leave without a deal? Well, let's put it like this. No deal is better than a very bad deal. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back on Monday evening from 7.